Echeveria is, in my experience, the most popular genus out of all succulent plants. And when you look at them, you can kind of understand why. They are simply beautiful. But as beautiful as they are, they can also be quite difficult to grow. Now, the reason for this video is this comment, and I would very much like to address the second part of this comment in today's video, because I get a variation of it both on here and also from my customers when I sell succulents. There are definitely reasons why Echeveria are a little bit more difficult than other plants to grow, and I want to give you the 7 most common ones that I have experienced. I am going to make another video addressing the first part of this comment because there is a reason why there is so much conflicting information out there when it comes to not just succulents but also a lot of other topics these days. But I would just quickly like to talk about the first sentence as well. So I would consider myself an expert because I have been growing succulents for a living in my nursery for good 11 years now, and I have grown millions of succulents from scratch. We usually grow them from leaves, cuttings, or we get them as tissue culture. So I do know quite a bit about them. I don't know everything, and there are things that I learn every day. But when I do talk about a group of succulents or a particular cultivar, I have not grown just one, I have grown thousands of them. So I can see some patterns that occur when growing succulents. But not only that, I also hear from other people, such as other growers, but also my customers when it comes to growing Echeveria. And all of this information does kind of give a clear picture as to what is happening with Echeveria and why they are difficult to grow. Having said that, I am pretty sure that there will be some people out there that will have different experience to mine, and that is fine. We are talking about living things, and different conditions will make succulents behave in different ways, so quite normal to get different results. So let's start off with a little bit of general information about Echeveria. Echeveria is a genus of about 150 species. However, many more different cultivars exist thanks to crossbreeding and mutations. Now, crossbreeding Echeveria is a big business, and in recent years they have kind of exploded. I've seen so many different cultivars on the market, and I think it is also one of the reasons why people may have so many problems with Echeveria in particular. They can often be bred more for looks rather than hardiness, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Pretty much all Echeveria are native and have evolved in semi-desert areas of Central America, Mexico, and some areas in northwestern South America. So this means that they are used to dry conditions as well as exposed areas, so they get quite a lot of light where they naturally grow. So just this little bit of information will tell us why they do struggle in the modern garden. So Echeveria can be found in gardens in cultivation pretty much all around the world, and often the conditions in these gardens are very, very different from the places that they have evolved in. The first major reason why Echeveria are very much susceptible to dying is overwatering and receiving more water than they need. This can either be by just watering too much yourself or because of the weather. When Echeveria are overwatered, they are particularly susceptible to diseases such as edema, where the plant just takes up way too much water and the cells in the leaves have so much water in them they rupture and die. This can cause very ugly marks on the plants. I wouldn't say that edema can cause death in succulents, but it can definitely cause some really unsightly marks, and some leaves may die off because of it. But what can cause death is the fungal diseases that will be more prevalent when Echeveria are watered too much and they have too much water in the potting mix or in the soil. In particular, rot, one of the most common fungal diseases, and it can definitely kill your succulent very quickly. Rot can start in the leaves, it can start in the roots. It is usually spread by pores, but it can also be caused by soil-dwelling organisms, and they usually move in when parts of the plant dies. So they settle in the dead parts, in the dead roots, and then they spread throughout the plant. This is pretty common in Echeveria, and for some reason they are often a good host for this fungus. And it is not just this fungus, it can also be powdery mildew or black spot. Now all of these can be treated with a fungicide or by just keeping your Echeveria dry, but I would also like to say that not all Echeveria are this susceptible. So here I've got a bunch of Echeveria that I've just collected from parts of the nursery. There's about 70 different species here, and only this tray here are cultivars that have problems. So all of these guys are looking quite nice and they do live outside permanently. They are not that affected when they get overwatered by rain. So firstly, I would like to show you what these different overwatering issues can look like. Now this is a very good example of edema. So all of these bubbly bits in the leaves are dead cells. These will not go away, and you can see that some of the leaves have started off dying, yellowing and dying, and I think this is when the rot can move in, because we've got all of these dead leaves here, and as I said before, rot is attracted to dead parts of the plant. I don't think this plant will die, but I certainly cannot sell it. It is not looking great. So plants like these that do very much suffer from edema need to be in a greenhouse where they are not rained on, where they get plenty of light but good ventilation, and where you can control the watering. The next thing I want to show you is powdery mildew. So this is as a result of powdery mildew. The powdery mildew is already gone, but this is what it looks like. It basically kills parts of the leaf. So here's another fungal disease. So this is rot in the leaves, and Echeveria, Pearl von Narenberg are particularly susceptible to it. They can rot quite easily, and yeah, just they also need a greenhouse, and a ventilated one at that. Another fungal disease that I haven't mentioned but affects the furry plants, usually called the Pulvinata Echeveria. This one's called the Doris Taylor, and it is this yellow thing is rust. It is a fungal disease that will eventually cause a death of a leaf, and here's another Pulvinata that often suffers from it if it rains too much or if it's too humid. These are more prone to dying from it. So depending on where in the world you are, to grow these Echeverias that are particularly susceptible to edema or fungal disease, you will need a greenhouse to grow nice healthy plants. It will need ventilation because fungal disease can spread even when the plants are dry. The spores do travel in the air and they can settle even on greenhouse plants, so you will need something to move the air around. I would say that if you choose the right cultivars, you will not have that many problems. I grow all of my plants outdoors all year round. We don't get that much frost, but we do get hot summers and we can sometimes get very wet years, and it has been pretty wet for the last 4 years. We have had some record-breaking rains, and there's not that much wrong with them. They are looking quite nice. There's a little bit, there are signs on some of them, but most of them will tolerate a lot of rain. You can watch some of my other videos where I show you succulents after a lot of rain in my nursery, and you will see that most of them are fine. If they get plenty of light and a good well-draining potting mix, they should survive. Now, the second reason I think is going to ruffle up some feathers. I know a lot of people are going to be enraged when I say this, but Echeveria can definitely die when they are underwatered. So the reason I have included this in here is because I have seen so many photos from my customers that would ask for my opinion why their Echeveria is struggling, and it was simply because they have been starving it of water. Now, even though Echeveria have evolved in semi-desert areas and they do prefer to be dry rather than wet, they still need to be watered every now and again, especially in the summer months when it's also very hot. If you've got a very dry Echeveria and it's also something like 40 degrees outside, it can send them into shock and they can die. I think a good rule to follow with watering not just Echeveria but pretty much any other succulent, is to water when the potting mix has dried up completely. You will be able to tell when your potting mix is dry. You just kind of move it around a little bit, and when it looks dry, you can water again. If you have only a few plants, it is best to water them from the bottom, so you can take your pot and sit it in a container of water and submerge it probably to about halfway through and leave it there for a few minutes so your plant can have a good drink. I water overhead because I've got way too many plants. Watering overhead is not going to kill them either, but it is just a little bit better if you don't have too many plants and you can afford to individually put them into dishes of water. It is slightly better for them because if their leaves are kept dry, then the fungal diseases that settle on the leaves will just not have a chance to establish. Okay, so moving on to the third reason, and I think this may be one of the most common reasons why Echeveria die, and it is not enough light or growing Echeveria indoors for too long. In semi-desert areas, there's not that many large trees or shrubs that would create shade cover, and so a lot of these plants have evolved being battered by the sun, and they do grow best when they are in plenty of light. Indoors, it is very, very rare that you will be able to grow Echeveria long term. They can either start stretching or they will start losing leaves. When I did my experiments with growing Echeveria indoors, they would pretty much rot even while being dry, so their leaves would go all mushy, and they would last something like 3 to 4-5 months. It really depends on how much light you can give them inside, and if you have a pretty bright windowsill or if you have a sunroom, you may be able to grow them inside, but I think in the majority of cases they will not do very well and will eventually die. There are many other succulents that will grow indoors, such as Haworthia, Sansevieria or Ripsalis, but Echeveria are not. I would not recommend growing Echeveria indoors. If you really want to grow them indoors, you may want to get plant growing lights. Succulents like a lot of bright light, so if you are going to go down this road, I would recommend full spectrum white light for about 12 hours every day. Okay, the fourth reason why Echeveria may die are pests. So there is quite a wide range of pests that attack Echeveria. The smaller pests such as aphids or mealybugs tend not to completely kill plants off, but the larger pests, namely grubs, slugs, caterpillars or grasshoppers, if they get too far into the stem, they can kill off the whole plant. Bigger animals, in Australia we've got possums, they can pretty much raise a succulent down to the ground in one sitting, and I've heard there's quite a lot more around the world. Deer, for instance. My chickens absolutely love succulents, so do be careful. If you've got chickens running around your garden, they can devour a whole succulent quite easily. Okay, the fifth reason is potting mix that is not suitable to grow succulents. A lot of the time, people like to just use garden soil that they dig up. And if you are growing succulents in the garden, you can plant them directly in the garden soil. But if you are growing them in pots, I would very much recommend a succulent potting mix. I use a succulent potting mix that has a lot of bits to it. So there's minerals, pine bark fines. It's all made by a company that does potting mixes for local nurseries, and it goes on the back of my ute and I get it by the ton, so I'm not sure if it comes as a bagged product that you can buy in the shops. But here in Australia, the company that is partnered with this company is called Depco or AGS, and they often do have potting mixes that sell in either Bunnings or other garden centres. So if you are going to buy a succulent potting mix, Depco is a good one. I have tried quite a few potting mixes and I don't particularly like sandy potting mixes. I think that there should be a lot of other bits, but I also think that they should not be too big or too small. Just somewhere in the middle is kind of good. I do have a few videos on how to make your own or what potting mix should look like, so I will tag them in the description below. So the sixth reason is heat waves and direct sun when it's way too hot. So here in Australia we can get summer temperatures of well over 40 degrees Celsius. I think it's about 104 Fahrenheit. And while succulents will tolerate the temperature, they may not tolerate being exposed to direct sun, and Echeveria do get burns quite easily. If it does get way too hot, I would recommend putting your succulents either a shaded spot, bright but shaded spot for the duration of the heat wave. Even the duration of summer, they will tolerate being outdoors in the shade, or you can get a shade cloth. I use 30% shade cloth over all of my plants during summer. It will also stop things like hail, and if you use it as a complete cover all around your plants, it will stop butterflies laying their eggs on your succulents, so you will also get a bit of protection from the pests. Summers are getting more extreme around the world, so do be careful when your succulents are exposed to direct sun. On the other side of the spectrum is frost. Most Echeveria are not frost tolerant. They can survive frost to about -3-4 degrees Celsius, but the majority will die if they are exposed to freezing temperatures for longer than a couple of hours. The water inside of their leaves will freeze over and it will cause them to die. So in countries where you get snow and frost, I would very much recommend taking your Echeverias indoors and placing them on the windowsill or where you've got the brightest light, and then taking them back outside as soon as it gets warm enough. The coldest temperature that we get is -2, -3 degrees over winter, and that only lasts for a couple of hours overnight, so I can have mine outdoors all the time. But if it's for longer and if it also snows, I would say that they are very likely to die. And the final thing that I would like to talk about is new hybrids. So historically, I would say that most plants were bred and hybridized to create hardier plants, but these days I find that it's mostly to create plants that look pretty, but they are not necessarily very hardy. So a lot of the Echeveria that you buy in the shops are hybrids these days. So it is quite unusual to find true species that grow in the wild, and I think they may be some of the best plants that you can grow, or hybrids of them. For instance, Echeveria elegans is one of my most favorite plants to grow. They are super hardy and I very rarely experience any problems with them. I do have a video on the hardiest Echeveria I grow in the nursery, and I will tag it below in the description as well. And I think that's all for today. I hope this video was useful. Do let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you all next time. Thank you very much for watching.